Welcome everyone, and yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm Mario, the founder and CEO of Series 8. We're a brand design and build studio, and we've been running the studio for just over 10 years. My background's actually in traditional graphic design. I studied in London and worked at a ton of agencies before starting Series 8. Today, I want to talk to you guys about the importance of branding for early stage companies. So let's dive in. Right, so before we get into anything, I want to hear a bit of information from you. So please feel free to write a few words in the chat. And I'd love to know, what comes to mind when you hear brand. Drop it in the chat. Don't overthink it. What words come to mind when you really think about what brand is and what that word means? Yeah, persona identity ads, what your business stands for. 100%. Yeah. I expected a lot of those. Yeah. You're not wrong. Those things are part of a brand. But here's the thing. So, your logo is never experienced in isolation. The way you see it during the design process, in the real world, on a website, a billboard, or a social post, a logo might represent only 5% of the experience. So everything else around it must communicate the brand on its own and the feeling you want. Here's a little quote from Seth Godin, who really said it well. People don't buy what you sell; they buy the story around it, the relationship, the feeling. And when you're an early stage company with no track record, no revenue, sometimes no product, your brand is the only thing that's doing the heavy lifting. It's your first impression with investors, with early adopters, with potential hires. It's a thing that makes someone lean in or kind of scroll past potentially. So it's really, really an important one. So why does brand really matter in the early stages? Um, Sort of this is the number one mistake I see constantly. Kind of a founder has an idea, they're super excited, they want to get moving, and the first thing they do is, they go and get a logo. Maybe they'll jump, on a freelance platform, they'll ask a friend to design their logo, or, these days potentially use an AI tool. And within a week, you've got a logo, some colors, and a basic website. You can prompt it, you can do whatever you want there. And, you feel like you've got a brand. But what are the missing pieces to that entire brand system? You've gone and skipped mission, vision, positioning, messaging, audience definition, and tone of voice. So all the foundational stuff that actually tells you what your brand should look like and sound like are missing, and you've just got that logo. So a lot of founders will say, "Oh, but we'll sort brand out later. It's all good." Um, and it's probably one of the most expensive sentences in startups. It's significantly more expensive to rebuild later. It confuses your audience that have already formed an impression. Team will be misaligned. They'll get confused about what you've designed now and what you're designing later and what you really stand for. And investors who they will doubt your self-awareness. So a little bit of research. It takes about 5 to 7 impressions before someone even remembers your brand exists. That means every touch point matters. Your website, your pitch deck, your social presence, your email signatures, all those items need to stay consistent at all times. If those things aren't cohesive, if you don't tell a consistent story, you're just burning impressions and getting nothing back.
Those are channel metrics, and your leadership does not care about channel metrics because they don't understand it. They understand dollar signs. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how to connect the GE.
I don't know what that was. Um,
For that
And here's,
reason, I'm just going to mute everyone.
yeah, that's cool.
Let me know whenever you want it to be interactive.
No worries. I think that's it for the interaction side. Yeah, it's all good. But thank you. So here's a commercial case, and a study from Lucid Press that found that consistent brand presentation across all platforms can increase revenue by 23%. So recognition builds trust, trust builds revenue, and this keeps compounding over time. So again, I'd mention this again, really keep your brand as consistent as possible throughout. So startups often change direction. You've probably changed yourselves and pivoted many times. A brand built a product features. Those features might die, they might change. A brand that's built on beliefs survives that pivot. So a good example of this is the BlackBerry. I don't know if you've seen the film or you remember the BlackBerry. For some of the older crowd like myself, BlackBerry killed the physical keyboard to chase the touchscreen, and nobody followed it because the keyboard was the brand. And then Apple killed the headphone jack, and then they brought it back, but they killed the home button, the entire iPod line, and nobody left because Apple was never about any single feature. So, early stage investors want to invest in founders who align with their own values. The story your brand tells becomes a big part of their investment decision. So, make sure you know who you are, and investors will follow. All right, so if jumping to a logo is the wrong move, what is the right move? This is the framework I'd encourage every founder to follow. And the core idea is simple. Don't build a brand, build a belief. The strongest brands in the world aren't built on aesthetic, they're built on attitude. Think about the companies you admire most. The ones whose products you choose, even when, there's a cheaper alternative. Nike, for example, they stand for something, they behave consistently. That's what you're building, an attitude, a posture, a personality that stands on its own. Another good example on the more of the technology side is Xero, which is an accounting software. Attitude doesn't mean, being loud and provocative. Xero, for example, have a clear point of view on how things should be done. This comes through in their UI, their tone of voice, onboarding, even how they talk about tax. They're just super clear and concise. They competed against the biggest established players. They won by having a point of view that was strong, and they didn't have a massive feature list either. And this attitude starts with belief. So it's not what you sell, but why you sell it. What do you believe about the world, your industry, your customers' problem? Nike believes in the athlete in everyone. Patagonia believes in protecting the planet. Vans believes in self-expression through street culture. So the visual identity, the tone of voice, the products, they all flow from a core belief or a key niche. If you don't know what yours is, everything downstream is guesswork. So let's look at how this translates with Patagonia. Their core belief is business should exist to protect the planet. Let's take a few of their touch points and see kind of how this resonates. In advertising, they have kind of documentary-led storytelling through YouTube. Their product lines are durable. Their jackets and all their products are also repairable, which is pretty amazing. Their visual identity in store uses natural colors, raw outdoor photography. Their experience, with their worn to wear repair program and community events, and also their content about, activism, founder and athlete-led stories. All these items lead to the customer's perception of Patagonia as an environmental movement that happens to sell clothing. So it's a pretty amazing story there in terms of how they really came about that. So let's go back to what I spoke about earlier and how I have seen founders approach branding. Start with a logo and then pick some colors and build a website. Maybe if you get around to it, you can add some strategy in there as well. But it's like furnishing a house, before you've even laid the foundations. So here's the order I'd recommend. Start with strategy. Strategy is where you'd be answering the fundamental questions of, what's your mission? What's the vision for where you're going? What values guide you and how you get there? How are you positioned relative to competitors? And who exactly are you trying to reach? This doesn't need to be kind of a 50-page document, you know. It doesn't need to be written down, agreed on, or referenced in every decision you make after this point. Then I'd move to kind of messaging. This is how you translate that strategy into words. So super important. What is your tone of voice? That tone of voice will be moved into the creative session as well, where you're thinking of, colors where, for example, if you're authoritative, formal, or casual, let's just say if you're playful, you're going to use potential playful or vibrant colors within your color tones and palettes. So messaging is super, super important at this stage. And what are the three things you always want people to take away from any interaction with your company? Can you explain what you do in one sentence, to a stranger, or, your typical elevator pitch? Most startups I work with, they can't do it cleanly. I get it. It's super hard. And if you can't articulate what you do and why it matters, your designer that you hire certainly won't be able to either. So really get those two fundamental pieces in line first. Moving into visual identity, which is obviously the fun part. Um, it's the logo, the colors, the typeface, the art direction, the illustration style. When you've done the strategy, the messaging work, the design brief practically writes itself. All that legwork and all that research that you've done is going to lead to a much simpler brief and a core understanding of what that visual design needs to look like. The designer would be translating a clear set of ideas into a visual language. And that's a different brief than, go and make us a logo, which is always the case. And you've seen this time and time again. And then experience, every touch point where someone encounters your brand, your website, your app, your emails, your pitch decks, your social media, your packaging. Think about Apple, even the way that you receive the product and you unbox it feels intentional. It's not because they have good design, it's because every touch point is designed to reinforce that core belief that they set forth at the beginning. You might not be Apple, but the principle is the same at every scale. Right. So a little exercise, a little live exercise here. Nothing to type out or anything like that, just to think about. Write it down on a notepad or maybe a digital notepad if you have one, whatever feels comfortable. But think about your brand as a person and how would you describe them in 3 words? How would you describe that person that's potentially a brand in 3 words? Think about it, write it down. I'll give you a few seconds and then we'll go to the next slide. Awesome. All right. So, now pull up your website if you have one. If you don't have one, pull up a pitch deck, anything that's public facing that you might present to someone. Look at that and look at what's on your screen. Does it feel like the person you've just mentioned, like Valerie mentioned, intelligent, compassionate, and creative? Does your site convey that? Does the design, the tone, the messaging, kind of the overall vibe match the 3 words I've just mentioned? And if there's a gap, and for many of you there definitely might be, I guess that's the real starting point of where the work is going to begin. Going just a little bit further than that, pretend or remove your logo from that website and see if those 3 words are resonating now. That's a pretty fun exercise to look at, and it really will help you kind of figure out, okay, let's start from the beginning. Let's really write those main points out first. Awesome. So I'm just going to talk about a little bit about my background and the agency as well, really quickly. As I mentioned in the beginning of our slides, I've been designing since 2008. I've worked at a ton of agencies, and in 2015, I co-founded Series 8. We're now over 25 people working across a bunch of time zones, mainly based in the UK, Portugal, Barcelona. And in the last decade, we've been building brands, websites, and experiences for startups and scale-ups. Some of the clients that we've been lucky enough to work with, some of them you might recognize in the large enterprise areas, and some are startups as well. And yeah, just some really exciting and diverse businesses there that really keep every day pretty fun and exciting. So I'll run you through a few brand results from some of the work that we've done just to show how that's come through. So I'm going to start with Vibe. Vibe Retail is a fintech payments business based in New York City. Um, they came to us with absolutely nothing, and we did all the brand steps that I mentioned before from start to finish. And here's some of the value that we brought from there. So in the last 12 months, this data comes from Google Search Console and Google Analytics. We've had a 91% increase in the organic click-through rates for branded searches. This is from all the work that we've done on the brand consistency route, and also with the marketing agency that supports us in making sure that that consistency follows through on socials, Instagram, printed materials, and so on and so forth. So it really helps the customer and the impression that they get of the brand memorable. So the organic searches there are showing through in the analytics. And there's 137 times higher click-through rate on the branded queries versus the non-branded. So for example, people are searching Vibe Retail POS versus POS Retail New York or whatever it might be. And those branded searches are coming through really, and they're shining through. I'm going to talk you through a little bit of FlowHub. They're a cannabis software business based in the US, valued at over $200 million. It's not a startup, but it's a good example of a transformation. So we've been working with FlowHub for over 8 years, and we've been working with the brand on the left for so long, and their values and their personality weren't reflecting in the visuals. They're a bold, rebellious, edgy, loud, and rule-breaking brand. The brand identity needed to express that energy. We were working with a founder that had so much energy. The team was vibrant and ready to go. And it just wasn't really showing up in the brand. It just wasn't consistent. And we just created a brand that's expansive and unconfined. Nothing's restricted to rigid lines or strict alignments. It's super punchy, loud, expressive. And it's built to carry the same raw energy across every touch point. So you can see that in some of these examples here. It's super flowy. It allows us to really have some fun with it. If you go to their current website today, we're actually redesigning the entire site. So the experience is a little bit jarring because we've just updated the logo. But if you go onto their socials or anything like that, you're really going to see that come alive with the new brand that we've brought forward with them. The data is super fresh. So it's only been 58 days, which is not a lot of days to get data. So I'm going to start with the quote that Annie, who the VP of marketing, shared with me. It's gotten tons of compliments, which is a nice to have. It's not really valuable in a lot of senses, but the big value is it's opened a ton of doors for new hires, investors, and the existing customers, engaged more than they did with the old brand. So some really, really amazing stats there. And then a few bits from Instagram where, the increase in profile activity has gone up by 247%. So their postings, the type of content that they're sharing with this new brand strategy and direction has really boosted their current brand. So it's pretty amazing stuff. Then I'm going to move into a helium mining company based in Tanzania. This one's super interesting. So they came to us and they said, "Look, we're looking to do exploration in Tanzania, and we're going live on the UK stock market, and we really need to bring trust forth to investors and new business as well." And we looked at the brand, we looked at the industry, and the industry typically focuses on, you know, physical work, excavation sites, machinery, and kind of on the ground processes. And we chose really to move away from this style and direction and instead build kind of a visual language around a future-facing vision. You know, the identity that you see here emphasizes innovation, technology, and kind of minimal and futuristic visuals with that kind of flowing, what we call as like the gradient of helium or whatever. You can kind of see that in the primary helium color. So we really wanted to kind of challenge the traditional players in the space and really go for something a little bit more modern and something that stands out. All right, so three takeaways that you can take away from this chat that we've had. Strategy for before design, you know, always do the thinking before you do the designing. Your brand is an investment, not an expense. You know, the money you spend on getting this right comes back in recognition, in trust, in conversions, in fundraising leverage. It comes back miles and miles ahead. And consistency builds trust. I've said this so many times. Trust builds revenue. Every time someone encounters your brand and it feels the same, cohesive, intentional, and considered. I'll leave you with this thought. Safe brands are invisible brands. The goal is not universal approval. You're never going to get that. The goal is memorability. Be the brand that people remember, that people talk about, that people feel something about. Don't be the brand that everyone glances at and nobody recalls. And one more quote. Don't be afraid to take risks. If no one hates it, no one will truly love it. No one truly loves it. Sorry. That's it.